Keanu Reeves stepped into one of Los Angeles' most exclusive restaurants, tired after a long day of filming. The moment he walked through the door, heads turned, not because they recognized the Hollywood star, but because of his worn-out jeans and old leather jacket. A security guard immediately blocked his path, looking him up and down with clear disdain. What happened next left everyone in the restaurant shocked, as the evening took an unexpected turn that would change how people at this establishment viewed success, fame, and human dignity. The golden California sun was setting over Los Angeles, casting long shadows between the towering buildings of downtown. The Maison Azur, an upscale French restaurant known for its celebrity clientele and month-long waiting lists, sparkled with its signature blue lighting. Crystal chandeliers threw dancing reflections across marble floors, while waiters in crisp black uniforms glided between tables draped in pristine white linens. Outside, the rumble of a motorcycle engine caught the attention of valets and guests alike. Keanu Reeves pulled up on his classic Harley-Davidson, his shoulders slightly hunched from a grueling 14-hour day on set. His face showed subtle signs of exhaustion beneath the scruff of a 3-day beard. He wore what he'd changed into after filming: faded jeans, an old black t-shirt, and a well-worn leather jacket that had seen better days. The restaurant's entrance featured tall glass doors framed in polished brass, with an elaborate foyer designed to separate the elite dining establishment from the ordinary world outside. As Keanu approached, the soft glow of the interior lights revealed tables filled with men in tailored suits and women adorned in designer dresses, all engaged in quiet conversation over wine glasses that caught the light. At the front desk, 3 hostesses in matching blue dresses managed reservations with practiced efficiency. The center podium, crafted from dark mahogany and topped with a leather-bound reservation book, stood like a gateway between the entrance and the main dining room. Behind them, a massive floral arrangement of white orchids and blue delphiniums reached toward the ceiling. As Keanu stepped inside, the cool air-conditioned atmosphere was a stark contrast to the warm evening outside. He ran a hand through his slightly disheveled hair, approaching the front desk with the same humble demeanor he carried everywhere. The hostesses were busy with a group of well-dressed patrons, their attention focused on finding the perfect table for what appeared to be a business dinner. That's when Marcus Johnson, the restaurant's newly hired security guard, noticed Keanu's presence. Marcus stood tall in his pressed uniform, a golden badge gleaming on his chest. He'd been hired specifically to maintain the restaurant's exclusive atmosphere, and in his 3 weeks on the job, he'd taken that responsibility to what some might call excessive levels. His eyes narrowed as he assessed Keanu's casual appearance, so different from the restaurant's usual clientele. The guard's hand moved to rest on his radio, his posture stiffening as he watched Keanu wait patiently at the desk. To Marcus, this was exactly the type of situation he'd been hired to handle. Someone who clearly didn't fit the restaurant's prestigious image. He began moving toward the front desk, his shoes clicking against the marble floor, each step building tension in the air. The evening was about to take a turn that would challenge everyone's assumptions about appearance, status, and the true meaning of class. Marcus approached the front desk, positioning himself directly between Keanu and the hostesses. His stance was wide, arms crossed, creating a physical barrier that immediately caught the attention of nearby diners. The restaurant's soft jazz music seemed to fade into the background as tension filled the air. "Sir, I need you to step back," Marcus announced, his voice carrying an edge of authority that made several heads turn. "This is a private establishment with certain standards." He gestured vaguely at Keanu's attire, his expression making it clear he found it wanting. Keanu maintained his characteristic calm, though fatigue lined his face. "I understand. I have a reservation under Reeves." His voice was quiet but clear, carrying no hint of confrontation despite the guard's aggressive posture. The head hostess, Sarah, glanced up from her reservation book, her fingers trailing down the evening's list of names. Before she could speak, Marcus stepped closer to Keanu, his shadow falling across the podium. "A reservation? At Maison Azur?" The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable. "I find that hard to believe." The ambient chatter in the restaurant began to dim as more diners noticed the developing situation. A couple at a nearby table paused their conversation, wine glasses halfway to their lips. The maitre d', Thomas, emerged from the dining room, his experienced eye assessing the scene with growing concern. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," Keanu suggested, reaching for his phone. "I can show you the confirmation email." His movements were deliberate and non-threatening, but Marcus's hand shot out, blocking the gesture. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Marcus declared, his voice rising slightly. We can't have people walking in off the street, disrupting our guests' evening. The condescension in his tone was palpable, drawing uncomfortable glances from the staff. Sarah, the hostess, attempted to intervene. "Sir, if I could just check the reservation dash," but Marcus cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "I've seen this before. People trying to sneak in, thinking they can talk their way past the desk. Not on my watch." Keanu stood motionless, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. The exhaustion from his long day of filming seemed to deepen, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not trying to create any problems. I'm just here for dinner." A small crowd had begun to gather in the foyer. Servers paused in their duties, watching the scene unfold. The restaurant sommelier, in the middle of presenting a bottle of wine, slowly lowered it back to the ice bucket, his attention drawn to the increasing tension at the entrance. Marcus took another step forward, his body language becoming more aggressive. "Listen, pal. I don't care what story you're trying to sell. This isn't some diner where you can walk in wearing whatever you want. There are people here who pay good money for a certain atmosphere, and I'm not about to let someone like you disturb that." The words hung in the air, heavy with prejudice. A few gasps emerged from the growing audience, and Thomas, the maitre d', finally began making his way toward the front desk, his face a mask of professional concern. Keanu's shoulders straightened slightly, though his demeanor remained calm. "Someone like me?" he repeated quietly, the question carrying a weight that made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus gestured dismissively at Keanu's motorcycle jacket and worn jeans. "Look at yourself. Look at where you are. This is one of the finest restaurants in Los Angeles. People wait months for a table here. They dress appropriately. They arrive in proper vehicles. They understand what this place represents." The restaurant had grown nearly silent now, the usual clinking of silverware and murmur of conversations replaced by tense anticipation. Even the kitchen staff had begun to peek through the service doors, drawn by the unusual quiet in the dining room. Thomas finally reached the front desk, his presence adding another layer to the already complex situation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone professional but cautious, eyes darting between Marcus and Keanu. Before anyone could respond, Marcus straightened to his full height, reaching for his radio. "No problem at all. This gentleman was just leaving." He emphasized the word gentleman with obvious sarcasm. "Weren't you?" Keanu remained rooted in place, his calm persistence seemingly only aggravating Marcus further. The security guard's hand tightened on his radio, his patience visibly wearing thin. The evening had reached a tipping point, and everyone in the restaurant could sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Marcus's frustration reached a breaking point as he raised his radio to his mouth, his thumb hovering over the call button. "Security to front desk. We have an unwanted visitor refusing to leave the premises." His voice crackled through the radio system, echoing in the now silent restaurant foyer. Thomas, the maitre d', attempted to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps we should verify the reservation first," he suggested, reaching for the leather-bound book. Marcus stepped between him and the podium, his expression hardening with each passing moment. "With all due respect, Mr. Thomas, this is a security matter now. This person," he gestured dismissively at Keanu, "clearly doesn't belong here. Just look at him. He probably saw our lights from the street and thought he'd try his luck. We can't let people like this waste our time." Keanu remained still, his eyes studying Marcus with a mix of patience and something deeper, understanding. The exhaustion from his day of filming seemed to fade as he focused on the moment. "You seem very certain about who belongs and who doesn't," he observed quietly. Marcus scoffed, turning to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "You see what I'm dealing with here? He won't take a hint. This is exactly why they hired me, to maintain standards." He turned back to Keanu, his voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, this isn't a place for casual drop-ins. This is Maison Azure. People save for months to dine here. They dress appropriately. They make reservations weeks in advance." Sarah, the head hostess, tried once more to intervene. "If I could just check the system dash," but Marcus cut her off again, more forcefully this time. "The system doesn't matter. I know what I'm looking at. Someone trying to sneak in where they don't belong." The atmosphere in the restaurant had become electric with tension. Diners at nearby tables had completely abandoned their meals, watching the scene unfold. Kitchen staff clustered at the service entrance, whispering among themselves. Even the bartender had stopped mixing drinks, his shaker suspended mid-shake. "I understand you're doing your job," Keanu said, his voice remaining steady and respectful despite the mounting hostility. "But making assumptions about people based on how they look isn't part of maintaining security." Marcus's face flushed red. "Don't tell me how to do my job. I've worked security for 15 years. I know trouble when I see it." He stepped closer to Keanu, invading his personal space. "And right now, Trouble is wearing a beaten-up leather jacket and trying to talk his way into a 5-star restaurant." Thomas moved forward again, his professional demeanor showing cracks of concern. "Marcus, perhaps we should dash," but the security guard wasn't listening anymore. His focus was entirely on Keanu, as if this had become a personal mission. "You want to know what I see?" Marcus continued, his voice rising. "I see someone who walked in here thinking they could fool us all. Someone who probably couldn't afford the water here, let alone a full meal. Someone who needs to learn their place." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the watching crowd. Several diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some even standing up in protest. But Marcus seemed energized by the attention, as if each moment validated his authority further. "I'm not going to ask again," he declared, reaching for his radio once more. "Either you leave now, or I call the police. Your choice." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Keanu's response was measured, each word carefully chosen. "I don't want to cause any trouble. But I also won't leave simply because you've decided I don't look right for this restaurant. That's not how things should work." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Not how things should work. Let me tell you how things work here. This isn't some street corner cafe. This is where successful people come to enjoy their evening. People of class, of status. People who understand the value of appearance and respect." The words seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Even those who had been whispering fell quiet, the weight of the prejudice in Marcus's statements settling over the room like a heavy blanket. Keanu straightened slightly, his tired eyes suddenly sharp with purpose. "And what exactly does success look like, Marcus? Does it wear expensive suits? Drive luxury cars? Or might it have more to do with how we treat others?" The question seemed to catch Marcus off guard, but only for a moment. His hand moved to his radio again, this time with decisive purpose. "That's it. I'm done playing games." He pressed the call button firmly. "Security to dispatch. I need police assistance at Maison Azure. We have an uncooperative individual refusing to leave the premises." The radio crackled with acknowledgement as Marcus smiled triumphantly. "Now we'll see how long that calm attitude of yours lasts. The police don't take kindly to trespassers in establishments like this." The evening had reached a critical point. The restaurant's elegant atmosphere had transformed into an arena where prejudice and patience faced off against each other. As the minutes ticked by, waiting for the police to arrive, no one in the restaurant could have predicted how this confrontation would end, or the lasting impact it would have on everyone present. The wait for police felt endless in the tension-filled restaurant. Marcus paced near the entrance, throwing occasional glances at Keanu, who remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances. The evening air had cooled significantly, sending occasional drafts through the open doors as curious passers-by slowed their pace, drawn by the unusual scene unfolding inside Maison Azure. Thomas, the maitre d', had retreated to make urgent phone calls, his worried expression suggesting multiple conversations with restaurant management. Sarah, the head hostess, kept glancing between her reservation book and Keanu, her fingers nervously tapping against the podium's polished surface. Several diners had abandoned any pretense of eating, their meals growing cold as they watched the drama unfold. A woman in an elegant black dress whispered to her companion, "This isn't right. Look how he's handling it. So much dignity." Her words carried in the unusually quiet restaurant, causing Marcus to shoot her an irritated glance. The security guard's confidence had begun showing hairline cracks, though he worked hard to maintain his authoritative stance. "You could have just left when I asked," he said to Keanu, his voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. "Now you've disrupted everyone's evening." Keanu's response was thoughtful, his words measured. Sometimes standing your ground against unfair treatment is more important than avoiding disruption. The simple statement resonated through the restaurant, causing several diners to nod in agreement. The distant sound of police sirens grew steadily louder, their wailing cutting through the evening air. Marcus straightened his uniform, a smile of satisfaction crossing his face. Finally. Now we'll get this sorted out properly. Two police officers entered the restaurant, their presence commanding immediate attention. Officer Nate, a veteran of the force, surveyed the scene with experienced eyes, while her partner, Officer Rodriguez, positioned himself near the door, observing the gathered crowd. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Nate asked, her tone professional but neutral. Marcus stepped forward eagerly, gesturing toward Keanu. This individual refused to leave when asked. He claims to have a reservation, but look at him. Clearly doesn't belong here. We have standards to maintain. Officer Nate's expression remained carefully neutral as she turned to Keanu. Sir, could you explain your side of the situation? The respect in her tone contrasted sharply with Marcus's previous behavior. Keanu explained calmly, his voice carrying easily in the hushed restaurant. I have a dinner reservation. The security guard decided, based on my appearance, that I couldn't possibly be a legitimate guest. He refused to let anyone check the reservation system. Sarah, the hostess, finally found her voice. Officers, if I could just verify Marcus interrupted again, his voice sharp. That's not necessary. This is clearly a case of trespassing. He needs to be removed. Officer Rodriguez had been scanning the crowd, noting the reactions of the other diners. Sir, he addressed Marcus, you're certain you followed proper protocols before calling us? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the kitchen drew everyone's attention. The restaurant's owner, Michel Laurent, burst through the doors, his face flushed from rushing to the scene. He stopped abruptly, taking in the situation, the police officers, the silent diners, Marcus's aggressive stance, and Keanu's calm presence. Mon Dieu, Michel exclaimed, his French accent thickening with distress. What is happening in my restaurant? His eyes locked onto Keanu, and recognition flooded his face. Marcus, misreading his employer's expression, stepped forward confidently. Sir, I was just explaining to the officers about this individual who Michel cut him off with a sharp gesture, his face darkening with anger. Non. What have you done? Michel moved swiftly toward Keanu, his hands extended in welcome. Mr. Reeves, I cannot begin to apologize for this disgraceful treatment. The restaurant fell completely silent. Marcus's face drained of color as the reality of his mistake began to sink in. Several gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd as people finally recognized the actor they'd been watching all evening. Officer Nate's lips twitched slightly, suppressing what might have been a smile. Mr. Laurent, would you like us to remain? She asked professionally, though the answer was already clear in her tone. Michel shook his head vigorously, still holding onto Keanu's hand. Non, this is our shame to address. Mr. Reeves, please. He gestured toward the dining room, but Keanu remained where he stood. Before we move forward, Keanu said quietly, I think we need to address what happened here. Not because of who I am, but because of what it represents. His words carried through the restaurant, touching everyone present with their simple truth. Marcus stood frozen, his earlier confidence shattered, as the evening took yet another unexpected turn. The lessons about judgment, appearance, and basic human dignity were about to unfold in a way that would leave a lasting impression on everyone present at Maison Azure that night. Michel led Keanu toward a quiet corner of the restaurant, gesturing for Marcus to follow. The security guard's footsteps dragged heavily across the marble floor. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. Thomas and Sarah joined them, along with the restaurant's executive chef who had emerged from the kitchen after hearing the commotion. Mr. Reeves has been our guest many times, Michel explained, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. He is known not just for his incredible talent, but for his kindness and humility, the very qualities that, tonight, were met with suspicion and prejudice in my establishment. Marcus stared at the floor, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight around his neck. The reality of his actions crashed over him in waves as he remembered every dismissive word, every contemptuous gesture he had directed at one of Hollywood's most respected actors. I didn't know, Marcus mumbled. But Keanu raised his hand gently to interrupt. That's exactly the point, he said, his voice carrying no trace of anger. You didn't know who I was, and that's why your actions matter even more. Would it have been acceptable to treat anyone else that way? Michel pulled out a chair, inviting Keanu to sit. The actor declined politely, preferring to stand as he addressed the small group. Every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of what they're wearing or how they arrive. The restaurant had fallen into a respectful silence, diners and staff alike listening intently to the unfolding conversation. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work, gathering at the service entrance to witness this moment. But the reservation system, Marcus attempted weakly, grasping at his last thread of justification. Sarah stepped forward, finally able to speak without interruption. I tried to tell you multiple times. Mr. Reeves's reservation was right here. She opened the book, pointing to the entry. If you had just allowed me to check. Michelle's face reddened further. This is not how we train our staff. This is not what Maison Azure represents. He turned to Keanu, his hands spread in a gesture of apology. Please, Mr. Reeves, what can we do to make this right? Keanu studied the group before him, his expression thoughtful. The exhaustion from his long day of filming still showed in his eyes, but there was also a sense of purpose in his bearing. Making it right isn't about me, he said finally. It's about understanding why this happened and ensuring it never happens again, to anyone. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but Keanu turned to address him directly. You mentioned standards earlier. What are the true standards of a high-class establishment? Is it the clothes people wear, or how they treat others with respect and dignity? The security guard's face flushed with shame as the truth of these words sank in. Around them, several diners nodded in agreement, some even applauding softly. The lesson was reaching beyond just those directly involved. I've been in this industry for many years, Michel said, addressing his staff. And I've learned that true class has nothing to do with appearance. It's about how we treat each other, how we make people feel welcome, how we judge less and understand more. Keanu nodded, adding, the motorcycle I rode in on? It's the same one I often take to film premieres. The jacket I'm wearing? It's been with me through countless movies. These things don't define me, just as they shouldn't define anyone else who walks through your doors. The impact of his words was visible on every face in the gathering. Marcus, who had started the evening so certain of his judgment, now stood humbled before the very person he had tried to dismiss. The transformation in his demeanor was profound, the weight of his misconceptions finally falling away. Michel turned to address his entire staff, his voice carrying across the restaurant. Tonight, we have learned a valuable lesson, one that will change how we operate moving forward. He paused, looking each person in the eye. Our true measure of excellence will be how we treat every guest, regardless of their appearance or manner of arrival. The evening had transformed from a moment of conflict into an opportunity for growth and understanding. The tension that had filled the restaurant earlier had been replaced by something more meaningful, a shared recognition of the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. As the group began to disperse, Keanu placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, causing the security guard to look up in surprise. The hardest part of learning is acknowledging when we've been wrong, Keanu said quietly. What matters now is what you do with that knowledge. The security guard nodded slowly, understanding that this moment would define not just his career, but his approach to people for years to come. The evening wasn't over yet, and there were still matters to be addressed, but the transformation had begun. Not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had witnessed the events at Maison Azure that night. Michel gathered his entire staff in the restaurant's private dining room, while the regular service resumed in the main area. Keanu sat quietly at the head of the table, his presence serving as a powerful reminder of the evening's events. The room, usually reserved for celebrity gatherings and business moguls, now hosted a different kind of important meeting. Tonight showed us that we've lost sight of what true hospitality means, Michel began, his accent thickening with emotion. We've confused expensive clothing with character, and status with worth. He turned to Marcus, who sat with his shoulders hunched, uniform no longer carrying the same pride it had hours earlier. Marcus cleared his throat, standing slowly. I need to say something, he announced, his voice wavering slightly. Mr. Reeves, I judged you the moment you walked in. I didn't see a person. I saw what I wanted to see. A stereotype I created in my mind about who belongs here and who doesn't. Keanu nodded encouragingly, prompting Marcus to continue. The security guard looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his colleagues. I've probably done this to others before. Maybe not as obviously, but the prejudice was there. I was wrong. Completely wrong. Sarah, the head hostess, spoke up next. We all saw what was happening. Some of us tried to speak up, but not forcefully enough. Being passive in the face of discrimination makes us part of the problem too. The executive chef added his perspective, his kitchen white still dusted with flour from the evening service. In the kitchen, we never see who we're cooking for. Every dish gets the same attention, the same care, because that's what hospitality truly means. Maybe we need to bring that mindset to the front of house too. Michelle nodded vigorously. Exactment. This is what we must remember. Every guest, every person who walks through our doors deserves respect. Not because they might be famous, but because they are human. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but firm. Your restaurant is known for its excellent food and service. But true excellence isn't just about perfect dishes or wine pairings. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued. The staff listened intently as Keanu continued. I've been fortunate in my career, but success hasn't changed who I am. I still ride my motorcycle, wear comfortable clothes, and try to treat everyone with kindness. These aren't contradictions. They're choices about what really matters in life. Michelle turned to Marcus. Starting tomorrow, we will implement new training programs. Every staff member will learn about unconscious bias and proper guest relations. But more importantly, we must change our hearts, not just our policies. Marcus straightened in his chair. I'd like to be part of that training, if possible. Not as a trainer but as an example. My actions tonight, they show exactly what we need to change. The room fell silent as Marcus's words sank in. The transformation in his attitude was remarkable. From the arrogant security guard of a few hours ago to someone willing to become a teaching moment for others. That takes courage, Keanu observed quietly. Using your mistake to help others learn. That's how real change happens. Michelle outlined immediate changes to the restaurant's policies. Gone were the superficial judgments about appearance. Instead, the focus would be on treating every guest with equal respect and dignity. The reservation system would be properly checked for every inquiry, and staff would be encouraged to speak up if they witnessed any form of discrimination. Tonight was difficult, Michelle concluded, but necessary. Mr. Reeves, you've taught us more than any training manual could. Your patience in the face of prejudice, your willingness to turn this into a learning moment, these are lessons we won't forget. Keanu stood, preparing to leave. The exhaustion from his long day was evident, but there was satisfaction in his expression. The measure of a person, or an establishment, isn't in how they treat celebrities or wealthy clients. It's in how they treat everyone who crosses their path. The staff rose with him, many nodding in agreement. Marcus stepped forward one last time. Mr. Reeves, I know an apology isn't enough, but I am truly sorry. Not just for how I treated you, but for how I might have treated others before tonight. I understand now that I was the one who didn't belong here. Not because of how I looked, but because of how I acted. Keanu reached out to shake Marcus's hand. Understanding that is the first step toward change. Remember this feeling, and let it guide how you treat others going forward. As the meeting concluded, there was a sense that Maison Azure had changed fundamentally. The elegant restaurant would still serve its exquisite dishes and fine wines, but now with a deeper understanding of what true class and hospitality meant. The evening had transformed not just policies and procedures, but hearts and minds as well. The night had grown late at Maison Azure, but the impact of the evening's events continued to resonate through the restaurant. Keanu finally sat down for his dinner, choosing to eat at the bar rather than in the main dining room. The other diners had mostly departed, leaving the space quieter, more contemplative. Michelle ensured the kitchen prepared their finest dishes, but Keanu's simple order, a bowl of pasta and a glass of water, spoke volumes about his unpretentious nature. Marcus, who had asked to stay past his shift, watched from a respectful distance, the evening's lessons still processing in his mind. As Keanu finished his meal, a young server approached with tears in her eyes. What happened tonight, she said softly, reminded me of my first job interview. I almost didn't get hired because I couldn't afford professional clothes. Someone took a chance on me, looked past my appearance, and it changed my life. The restaurant staff had begun their closing routine, but everything moved at a slower pace than usual. Each interaction seemed more thoughtful, more conscious. The bartender took extra care serving his last customers, engaging them in conversation regardless of what they ordered. The hostesses welcomed late arrivals with renewed warmth, their judgments about appearance noticeably absent. Michel approached Keanu one final time, carrying a small leather-bound book. "We keep records of significant moments in Maison Azure's history," he explained. "Tonight will have its own chapter. Not because of who you are, but because of what you taught us." The owner opened the book, revealing an entry he'd just written. "On this night, we learned that true excellence in hospitality comes not from enforcing standards of appearance, but from maintaining standards of human dignity. Every guest who enters our doors carries their own story, their own worth, independent of how they look or what they wear." Keanu read the words silently, nodding in appreciation. As he prepared to leave, Marcus stepped forward one last time. The security guard had removed his jacket, looking more human without the symbol of authority he'd wielded so poorly earlier. "I've requested a transfer to our training department," Marcus announced. "If approved, I'll help new staff understand what I learned tonight." Sometimes the best teachers are those who've made the biggest mistakes. Outside, the Los Angeles night had cooled considerably. Keanu's motorcycle stood where he'd parked it hours earlier, but now the staff viewed it differently. Not as a sign of someone who didn't belong, but as a reminder that appearances never tell the whole story. The following weeks brought noticeable changes to Maison Azure. The restaurant instituted a new training program, using the evening's events as a case study in prejudice and privilege. Marcus, true to his word, became an advocate for change, sharing his story with every new hire. Reviews of the restaurant began mentioning not just the excellent food, but the remarkably welcoming atmosphere. At Maison Azure, one critic wrote, "They've mastered something beyond culinary arts. They've mastered the art of human dignity." The incident became a talking point in hospitality circles around Los Angeles. Other establishments began examining their own biases, questioning policies that might unfairly judge guests based on appearance. The ripple effect touched not just restaurants, but hotels, clubs, and other venues where snap judgments often determined how people were treated. 1 month after the incident, Michel received a note. It was from Keanu, written in his characteristic humble style. "Thank you for turning an uncomfortable moment into an opportunity for growth. True class isn't about keeping people out, it's about welcoming them in." The note found its place in the restaurant's leather-bound book, alongside Michel's original entry. Together, they told a story of transformation, how one evening of confronting prejudice led to lasting change. As for Marcus, he kept his security guard badge in his desk drawer, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder that true security comes not from judging others, but from creating an environment where everyone feels safe, respected, and welcome. Maison Azure continued to serve its exquisite French cuisine, but its greatest achievement became something far more meaningful than any dish it could create. It became a place where guests were judged not by their appearance or arrival method, but by the simple fact of their humanity. And somewhere in Los Angeles, a motorcycle could still be heard rumbling through the streets, carrying its rider to whatever destination awaited, a reminder that dignity, respect, and worth have nothing to do with how we look, and everything to do with how we treat each other.